What's up, all you chicken nuggies? All right, Abraham Lincoln. This story is about the division of the United States. When there's a division, that means people do not get along. So it's kind of about the United States not getting along. In this story, you will need to know certain words like the Confederacy. You will need to know the Confederacy. The word Confederacy means a government or the government formed by the states in the South after they withdrew from the United States. So, the Confederacy was the South fighting against the North of the United States. Elected means chosen or voted in. Heritage is something that you inherited or is passed down. Traditions or ways of doing things that haven't changed over time. This word is hard. It's important. It's called secede. Not succeed, but to secede. It kind of sounds like secession. Secede means to withdraw membership from an established group. So, in the Civil War, the South seceded, or they separated from the North. They left. They disagreed with the North's rules, and they left. And they seceded, and they formed the Confederacy. The Union was the northern states. The Union was the states in the north of the United States that stayed together and that wanted to abolish slavery. All right, let's begin our story. Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election in 1860 and became the 16th president of the United States. Unfortunately, the election only proved how divided the country really was. Lincoln believed that slavery should not be expanded into new states being formed in the West. Many people in the North agreed with the idea and voted for Lincoln. In the South, many people disliked Lincoln, and in fact, people could not even vote for Lincoln in 9 states. In 9 states in the South, because his name was not even listed on the ballot of candidates. Despite not being on the ballot in 9 states and without the support of a single southern state, on November 8, 1860, Lincoln was elected or chosen president because there were more people living in the North who voted for him. Many of the states strongly believed that the North and President Lincoln wanted to take away the right to set their own laws and wanted to abolish slavery. And the conflict was worsening. A couple of months after Lincoln was elected president, something unbelievable happened. Something Lincoln and many others had feared and hoped would never happen. Several of the southern states, seceded or declared that they were no longer part of the United States. The South Carolina was the first state to secede. The states of Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas soon followed. All 7 supported slavery, and all believed that the U.S. government under Lincoln would force them into doing things that they did not want to do, such as abolish slavery. These southern states intensely believed that they should be in charge of themselves, so they broke away and declared that they were forming their own country. They called their new country the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy for short. The Confederacy elected its own president, a man named Jefferson Davis. But Lincoln was not going to allow the United States of America to be broken up into separate countries. Lincoln said it was against the national law for a state to secede. Therefore, he said he would do everything in his power to unify or bring together the country. But as the months passed, it became clear that it would be impossible to avoid it. To learn what happened next, it's important to know about an event that took place in Charleston, South Carolina, in April of 1861, just after Lincoln became president. Charleston was a beautiful, charming, and wealthy city in the South. Its residents were proud of their beautiful city around the Southern heritage. Charleston was an important port city, and from its harbor, valuable goods such as cotton, sugar, and tobacco, which had been harvested by slaves, on plantations were carried by ships across the sea to Europe. Important ports like Charleston needed protection, so they built forts along the shore. The largest and most important of these forts was called Fort Sumter. Forts like these, with their large cannons and soldiers, were built to protect the harbor from invasion by pirates and enemy ships in times of war. Although Fort Sumter was in South Carolina, a Confederate state, the fort still belonged to the United States. The Confederates wanted Fort Sumter for themselves. They knew that they could not have a real country for their own as long as the U.S. soldiers were guarding the fort and controlling its guns. Fort Sumter also created a problem for President Lincoln. It was a fort located in an area now claimed by the Confederacy. President Lincoln now had three options: tell the U.S. soldiers to leave the port, send more U.S. soldiers to defend the port, or send supplies such as food to the fort so that the Confederate soldiers would try to stop them. To see if the Confederate soldiers would try to stop them. This was a difficult decision. If President Lincoln chose the first option, having U.S. soldiers leave the fort, he would be agreeing with the South that their decision to secede. If he chose the second option, sending more troops to defend the fort, the Confederacy might accuse him of starting a war. The president chose the third option, sending new supplies to see if the Confederacy would let the ships through. At the same time, the Confederates raised an army of their own, and they surrounded Fort Sumter and tried to convince the soldiers to surrender. But the soldiers said they had orders from President Lincoln to stay put, and this was exactly what they did. When the Confederacy heard President Lincoln was planning to send more supplies to the fort, the Confederacy opened fire. Early on the morning of April 12, 1861, before the sun had even risen, a woman named Mary Boykin Chestnut sat up in her bed, and though she'd awakened from a bad dream, then she heard the same type of sound that had shaken her from her sleep, a distant low boom, as described in her diary. Thinking it must be thunder, she put her head back down on the pillow, and the room was pitch black, and through the window she could see the light that was just barely beginning to rise, casting a light blue, slightly yellow light in the eastern sky. Suddenly, there was a series of loud explosions. Boom, boom, boom. These sounds were much closer. Mary Chestnut knew that the sounds were from cannons, not thunder. The cannons in the small fort nearest the town were opening fire, and Mrs. Chestnut knew that these were Confederate cannons. Mary walked out into the upstairs porch in time to see the light from the nearby cannons as they fired another volley into the early morning air. Mary was witnessing the bombardment of Fort Sumter. All morning, all afternoon, and through the night, for 34 straight hours, the Confederate cannons fired on Fort Sumter. The U.S. soldiers in the fort had cannons of their own, and they fired back. The air in Charleston filled with smoke from explosions and from massive guns. As the house rattled from the booms of the guns, Mary Chestnut sat down and wrote in her journal, "Fort Sumter has been on fire." Then in the early evening of April 13th, all the guns fell silent, and the U.S. soldiers in Fort Sumter finally surrendered. Amazingly, nobody on either side had been killed or seriously injured by enemy fire. Damaged Fort Sumter now belonged to the Confederacy. More important, it had become clear that the war could not be avoided. After the Battle of Fort Sumter, more southern states joined the Confederacy: Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina, as well as portions of Kentucky and Missouri. In all, there were 13 Confederate states, all from the South. It is important to remember that the states of Kentucky and Missouri did not actually secede from the United States, even though some people from those states decided to fight for the Confederacy. The remaining states, those that had not seceded, were in the North, and they had become known as the Union. I did not know that. The Kentucky and Missouri did not secede. The Confederacy made a flag to symbolize their new country. Oh, and you can see Kentucky, Missouri, and Maryland. And they were green, so they were undecided, which I don't know how you could be undecided. And then all the gray is the Confederacy, and all the blue, even California, Oregon, and Kansas, all the blue is the Union. And then all the yellow is areas that haven't been claimed yet, haven't been turned into states. So Washington Territory was just a territory, not a state. All right. And this is the Confederate flag. The Confederacy made a flag to symbolize its new country. The Confederate flag pictured at the bottom on the bottom left has 7 stars. So this one right here has 7 stars to symbolize the first set of states that seceded from the Union. The flag pictured in the bottom right with 13 stars symbolizes the Confederacy after the Battle of Fort Sumter. So it has 13 stars to symbolize the states that joined. The states in the Union continued to fly traditional flag of the United States, pictured at the top, which at the time of the Civil War only had 34 stars, 1 for each state, including the Confederate States. With the Battle of Fort Sumter, a new and painful chapter of American history began. Mary Chestnut, for her part, continued to write in her journal, keeping record of the Civil War through the eyes of a Southerner. By the end of the war, Charleston, where it all began, was very fortunate that it had not burned to the ground, like many of the cities in the South. That's my story. There's some interesting parts of this. I actually went to Charleston, and I took a tour of this island, Fort Sumter, when I heard that they had palm trees that were so flexible that the cannonballs would hit them and they would bend and they would kind of shoot the cannonballs back, or they would fling them out into I guess that's the ocean, because it's like a little inlet, little gulf there. And they had submarines back then, which is kind of crazy. Boats that they had armor and stuff, and they were like hunkered down real low, like this one right here with the guns and turrets. It has armor on the outside. You can see they're all steamboats too. They're steam powered. Cool. I'll see you guys in the next lesson.